Good morning, everybody. I am Ron Brownstein, editorial director of Atlantic Media, publisher of the Atlantic and National Journal magazines, and we are here to talk about building a 21st century economy with four governors who are actively engaged in that work. Relevantly, I guess, for this audience, we have four governors with experience in the private sector. John Hickenlooper, the Democratic governor of Colorado, was a geologist, then the founder of a brew pub that helped to create one of the coolest neighborhoods in America, Lodo, in Denver. Terry McAuliffe, the Democratic governor of Virginia, has owned home building and green tech companies. Pat McCrory worked for the Republican governor of North Carolina, worked for over 2 decades as an executive at Duke Energy in North Carolina. And Pete Rickards, the Republican governor of Nebraska, has served as CEO of Ameritrade, the online trading business founded by his family. In addition, they all have experience in public office and public policy. Governors Hickenlooper and McCrory as the mayors of Denver and Charlotte, respectively. Terry McAuliffe as chair of the Democratic National Committee. We think of him as a graduated hack, right? I say that as someone who still has not graduated.
Trying to be governor.
Right. Someone who has not graduated. And Governor Rickards was, of course, the founder of the Platt Institute, a free market think tank. So let me start by asking all of you one common question. As you have now had a few years to kind of look at it, work at it, what do you think are the most important things that a state can do to accelerate job growth within its borders? Governor Hickenlooper, start us off.
So what we did, and I think what every state's doing, we tried to change the brand of the state. We wanted to be seen not just as a place with the most beautiful resorts in the country, but pro-business, 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 high standards, right? So if we're going to support hydraulic fracturing or exploitation of oil and gas, let's do it so we make sure our air and water stays clean. First state to regulate methane emissions, things like that. But also go at regulations, right? And so many entrepreneurs, we wanted to be a place where we'll all compete against each other to get CEOs to move companies. But the real battle is over where do the young entrepreneurs want to go, right? And so we want to get rid of as many regulations and make as close to frictionless starting a business and expanding a business to really be able to be known as the place that is, if you're going to start up a business, this is where you want to do it. And that gets you into, education and, we're trying to be the healthiest state in America, kind of the foundation stuff. But overall, I think you want to let the world know that you're not only open for business, but you are pro-business. And you're going to work with every entrepreneur and every large business that, when they come, once they arrive, it's not the end, it's the beginning. You need to make their transition good. You need to be a partner and help them grow their business. Arrow Electronics came out and moved to Colorado 3 years ago. They're a $20 billion company, moved out of Long Island. And I still talk to the CEO, every couple months. How can we help? Make sure he meets all the other CEOs. It's building that brand to be pro-business.
Governor McAuliffe.
Virginia is always viewed as a very business-friendly, pro-business, low taxes. We haven't changed our corporate tax rate, 6%. We haven't changed it in 43 years. So low taxes, pro-business, next to the federal government. Our big challenge for us, Virginia is the #1 recipient of Department of Defense dollars. So that's great when they're spending money, but when they're cutting, like we've already seen about $9.8 billion in Virginia cut, mostly Northern Virginia. We have to grow, diversify the economy. We're already viewed as very pro-business, low taxes. How do you bring those new businesses in? We've been very successful. I've done about $6.4 billion in my first year in office, which not that anyone's counting, double any governor in Virginia history, but no one's counting. But listen, we have to go out and recruit. We've got great universities. We're close to the federal government. We got the deepest port on the East Coast. We got tremendous military assets, the Pentagon, the CIA, Quantico, the largest naval base in the world. But because of the change in sequestration and defense cuts, diversifying comes down to education, pre-K, early childhood development, having a great education system, and workforce development is what we really are refocused. Don't talk to me about degrees, talk to me about skill sets. We have jobs available. We got to make sure that our education system is training people to come out with the skills to match the jobs. And that has been my focus.
We're going to come back to that in a minute in the workforce. But Governor McCrory.
Well, in addition to lowering our income tax and our corporate tax to be more competitive with my fellow governors, the thing I'm interested in, I kind of come from an Eisenhower Republican philosophy, and that is investing in infrastructure in the future. Because we're now the 9th largest state in the United States of America by population, and we're growing at a rate that's greater than the rest of the nation. And most people don't realize that about North Carolina. So I've got to prepare the infrastructure of the future. In fact, just last week, I proposed a $2.8 billion bond referendum for this November for roads, for rail, for ports, for universities, for community colleges. And so we can anticipate growth and prepare for growth as opposed to reacting to growth. And that's the way we connect commerce with our populace and even with our neighboring states. The biggest challenge that we're investing in is also filling the skills gap of America. And I think there is a skills gap because each of us literally have thousands of job openings, even with a fairly relative high unemployment rate in our country that's lowered. But if we don't find the mechanics, the electricians, the IT personnel, the accountants, we're not going to be competitive. So we're putting a lot more emphasis on career training and also re-emphasizing more market-based training in our universities so we can fill the jobs that are opening, not only for today, but for 10, 20, 30 years from now.
Thanks. Governor Ricketts.
Yeah, I would actually build on what you were saying as well. In Nebraska, we've got the lowest unemployment rate in the country, 2.6%. So it's a little bit of a different challenge for us with regard to the jobs, but it gets back to that training, making sure that the people that we have here in the state are getting that right workforce to be competitive with the other states. So it really is a package of making sure you got the right people, and frankly, in Nebraska, we've got the best people in the world. They're well-educated, they're loyal, great, hard-working Midwest work ethic. We got to make sure we get our taxes in line, and we got to make sure, again, to the regulation, make sure we're competitive on that. But you start pulling all this together, and that's what makes your state attractive for companies to expand.
I'll put in a plug just for Nebraska. If you haven't gone and hung out in Omaha, and you think I'm kidding, it is alive. The downtown is full of vitality, and it is attracting more people into it.
You've all touched on workforce, and I'm going to come back to that in 1 minute. But before I do, let me ask you, are there specific sectors of the economy that you see as the biggest opportunities for your state at this point? Governor Ricketts, let me start with you this time.
Well, we're going to build on our strengths. Agriculture is our #1 industry in Nebraska. And by 2050, there'll be 2 billion more people on the face of the earth. And because of rising standards of living, we'll have to double the food supply. So we're going to start by trying to grow agriculture primarily through innovations and trade, opening up those doors in Asia, Europe. In fact, I'm scheduling a trade mission for first part of June, right after our session's over, to start opening up their doors there and try and get some of those non-tariff barriers knocked down. So that's where we're going to focus, and then manufacturing comes right after that. Again, that's where the workforce development and the skills become so important, making sure, again, that in our school system, young people know that there's great opportunities available in the skilled workforce. That, I was talking to a company, Ash Grove Cement in Louisville. They told me that if you get a 2-year electrician's degree out of high school and come work for them, you'll make 22 or 23 bucks an hour. Stay there a year and pass 2 tests, you're making 28 bucks an hour. Think about that. That's a 21-year-old making $56,000 a year plus full benefits. And we have jobs like that available all across our state. We just have to help people get the training to take them.
Specific industries, Governor McCrory?
Well, one thing I believe in, I believe this as a mayor and I believe this as a governor, and that is that you have to have a diverse economy so you can weather the storms if any one sector of the economy gets hit. And I think that was Charlotte's strength when I was mayor, and I think that's our state's strength. So agriculture is still very big in North Carolina, and tying in agriculture to biotech and the drug industry and other industries is very important in North Carolina. The Research Triangle area is doing extremely well in that. Manufacturing is huge. Manufacturing is coming back to the United States, coming back to North Carolina, because we are now competing against China, partly because the equipment is not as dependent on labor as it used to. It's now required to have talent. And plus the energy issues, the logistics issues is now helping us in throughout the Southeast in many states. So manufacturing is coming back strong. The finance industry continues to be very strong in North Carolina. And the transportation and logistics industry is also very strong.
What are you focusing on? What do you see as the biggest
A couple of the biggest areas, obviously, I think cybersecurity. Clearly for us, they're in the metropolitan Washington region. Federal government is going to spend billions and billions on cybersecurity as our company. So we are working very hard to build the cyber business there. I would also, biosciences. I just kicked off, just had our first Governor's Bio Conference the other day, 400 companies from around the globe. We invited to Virginia. I think the biosciences, biolife sciences, human genome sequencing, and I say cybersecurity, I think are the biggest opportunities of growth if you're trying to build those jobs for the 21st century.
You've had a big focus on energy, Governor Hickenlooper, both kind of renewable energy and conventional energy. Talk a little bit about some of the areas in Colorado you see as the biggest areas of growth.
We've done all of the above in terms of energy, but we've also tried to make sure, I went out as a geologist back in 1981, and when the price of oil collapsed, a company got sold, I got laid off. So I've seen firsthand what those recessions look like. And we really have diversified. And we're focusing now more on things like advanced manufacturing as those businesses come back, robotics, a lot of the technology jobs, and whether it's in agriculture, I mean, we're going to try and be the Silicon Valley of agriculture, although obviously we'll compete with Lincoln on that. But a lot of this is driven by young people, and young people obviously have a lot of choices. They're not as tied down maybe as they were in previous generations. So we're trying to say, all right, if we're going to be in technology and GPS and geospatial technologies like that, we want young people to come, and we focus not just on we've got outdoor recreation, 300 days of sunshine, all that Chamber of Commerce stuff. We've also focused on really being inclusive. Everyone's welcome. A lot of music. In Denver now, there are more live music venues than there are in Austin or Nashville. People don't think of us like that. But part of that, we've been for the last 5 or 6 years, along with Washington, D.C., the #1 destination for millennials. So we've got these young people coming in. It means you get we want to be the place where entrepreneurs want to come, right? If we can make it great for entrepreneurs, then the large businesses will do as well.
So you, basically, in your own life, you discovered that beer was a steadier industry than energy. Is that?
It was steadier, and you get these young people, and they, again, why we're one of the craft beer capitals of the world. It also means you get some things maybe you wouldn't choose, like marijuana getting legalized.
Yeah, well, yeah. Kind of local color. Let's talk about the workforce issues and both attracting young people and training your own young people. So let me start with a broad question to get to a few more specific ones. What is the biggest challenge you face today in terms of your workforce? Do you have the workers you need for the jobs you're attracting and creating? Governor McAuliffe?
We clearly have the workers, but it's your education system, and that's what I've tried to do with our community colleges and all of our college presidents. I always say, don't come in and talk to me about degrees and you want more money and you want to raise tuition. Talk to me about skill sets. So changing the way we think about an education. I have 30,000 jobs open right now in Northern Virginia in the tech space. These companies aren't going to sit around and wait for me. They will move to another state unless I can fill that skills gap. So it is getting your educational institutions really changing, force them to change, to put emphasis on credentialing and apprenticeships. We have 810,000 veterans in the Commonwealth of Virginia, per capita more than any other state. We have more women veterans. We have more veterans under the age of 25 than any state in America. They have a great education in the military. Let us take their training and education, give them a credential, move them right into the workforce. So ending up some of the old theories we've had in education, taking past experiences, get them a credential, give them an apprenticeship, and move them right into the workforce.
Do you have the workers you need for the jobs you're creating?
In some areas, no, and I think our whole country does it. We all have to. That's our greatest challenge, and that's going to be our competitive edge. Whoever wins that battle for the competitive worker. One way is what they're doing in Colorado, in Asheville, and Charlotte, and Raleigh, and Wilmington, major metro, Greensboro, Winston. The youth are coming. The 20 to 25-year-old wants to now come to North Carolina because of the quality of life. They're moving first and then looking for a job. They're picking their locations first. The biggest challenge is in, frankly, the small rural towns throughout North Carolina and throughout the United States that used to be what we referred to as mill towns. The manufacturing left 20, 30 years ago. How do we connect those small towns to the economic regions? And that's what I'm doing through infrastructure. I'm even connecting in some of my northeastern towns like Elizabeth City. I'm connecting through roads and technology to Hampton Roads, recognizing the political boundaries, state boundaries, really mean very little when you're trying to find people jobs. Military is another. North Carolina has the second largest number of military in the United States, and we think that's a great economic development recruitment tool. We just offered in-state tuition for anyone coming home from Afghanistan and Iraq, even though they're not North Carolina citizens. If they're coming back through Fort Bragg or Camp Lejeune or others, we want them to stay in North Carolina because we think the military, the 28, 29, 30-year-old can help fill that skills gap immediately.
Governor Hickenlooper, do you have the workers you need for the jobs you're creating?
Certainly not now, and we are, just like North Carolina, attracting a lot from other places.
Right.
But I think what Terry's talking about of making sure that skills gap we've got enough people. We just haven't done a good enough job giving them certificates, and sometimes 6 months is all they need is to be really ready to get for a job that, as each of these guys will say, it's, you know, in 5 years you're making $75,000 or $80,000 a year.
In fact, that's a huge issue. We all have to break through some of the education bureaucracy, because a lot of times the businesses are just saying, get me the certification.
Right.
And sometimes the education bureaucracy makes it very difficult to get that certification within a reasonable amount of time. And my major emphasis, whether it be the 2-year community colleges or even our universities, is cut through the education red tape to even get such things as a teaching degree. My education advisor came from Harvard graduate degree, Teach for America, taught in New York City, and it took him 18 months to get a teaching degree in North Carolina. That's crazy. We ought to get a teaching degree in 2 weeks. So we got to cut through some of the red tape.
Governor, you see the challenge. I'm hearing mostly, you're saying the challenge is mostly at the credentialing, certificate, and 2-year level more than the 4-year level necessarily, more than necessarily getting more people through to 4-year degrees. What is your experience?
Yeah, that was where we're looking at it too. I mean, again, with a 2.6% unemployment rate, we need people to, you know, hold on to our young people and get people to move to Nebraska as well. We've got the best place in the world to live, so if you're young and looking to start your family, come move to Nebraska. It's the best place. If you care about being someplace where people care about each other, you want to be in Nebraska. So we're going to be focusing on the workforce development aspects. Again, getting the private sector involved. One of the ideas we're going to try to copy is based on Michigan's Michigan Advanced Technical Training Program, where private sector companies work with the schools to create a curriculum, hire people part-time in high school, pay for the post-secondary education, and create that pipeline to hire them directly out of that. Yeah. So that's one thing we can do. The other thing, too, is our workforce participation rate in Nebraska is 72%, which is actually high for the country, but low for Nebraska. And it means that there's over 1 in 4 Nebraskans that could be working that's not. And so, again, copying an idea from Louisiana, changing our unemployment system into a re-employment system to help connect people who are out of work with the skills, you know, help them create a resume, help them connect them with the jobs that we have available. I'm a big believer in stealing other people's good ideas.
Let me ask you about another aspect of this. Maybe we can go to the slides at this point. Let's start with slide 1. You all have comparable share of your population that is under 18. But if you kind of go to slide 2 now, if you look at it, much more diverse, is a little less relevant in Nebraska than Colorado, Virginia, and North Carolina. What we're seeing is the under 18 population is enormously diversifying. In fact, if you look nationwide and you counted up all the kids behind all the school desks in all the public schools in America, this is the first year in American history where a majority of our K-12 public school population is non-white. And as you see here, in North Carolina, 46%, Virginia, 44%, Colorado, 43%. The non-white share of the under 18 population is already nearing majority status, and you're all on that trajectory to reach that. And if we go down to the next 3 slides real quick, as you see, the post-secondary in particular attainment level for Colorado, for all the states really, and not unique to your states, really all across the country, for Latinos and African Americans in particular, lag significantly behind the post-secondary attainment for whites. And so the question really becomes, as these African American and Hispanic kids are a bigger share of the future workforce, how difficult is it, and what are the implications if you can't close the kind of attainment gaps that you're seeing on these charts, as these kids become a bigger share of the future workers you're trying to credential? Governor Hickenlooper, maybe start with you.
So this, and we call this the Colorado paradox, right? We have about the highest percentage of people with college degrees in the country, and yet we have real challenges with large portions of our population to get them to complete high school and attend college and then complete college. And we put a great deal of time into it. Part of it's cultural, and you see the Asian population has a much higher college completion level than even the Anglo community. Mm-hmm. And that's a cultural issue, right? That's the parents really getting involved from the very earliest years of school. So we're trying to create, how do you create that, change that culture in all of our communities and make, I mean, part of it's driving home the fact that the jobs of the future are going to be more and more connected to your training, your skills, your education. And if you're not willing to work hard when you're younger, you're going to have more difficult choices down the road. And make sure that their parents are hearing that, and that becomes a conversation at home, even in single-parent families.
Almost 45% non-white now, the under 18 population. How do you close those educational gaps, and what are the implications if you can't?
Well, the first thing you have to do, and I'm a huge advocate, you got to start with the pre-K education. Every child ought to have access to a pre-K. You can look at every study. Every teacher in kindergarten will tell you they can tell the difference in those that have had a pre-K education and those that have not. So, as John said, starting early, doing that education system early is how you do it. The reason we're all talking about credentialing and apprenticeships is that every study in America shows that 60% of the job growth will be on those requirements that's less than a four-year college degree, basically two. So it's really reshaping your college, your community colleges. I've gone to every one of my community colleges. I've told them I want, and I have reports from them, I want them to go out in their community. They need to meet every single major employer in the area that they serve. And you ask them, what do you need from us in order to fill that skills gap, in order to get folks who can go into your company? And if you don't do it, you won't be there much longer. So it's getting the whole education, but starting early, working with your community colleges, and focus. I was at a school the other day in Northern Virginia. 68% English was a second language. The school had been failing for years and years. I went there to celebrate. Finally, they have met all the state requirements and have made all the attainment levels. They've done it in 2 years, bringing in the parents, changing how we teach, and having a great principal and great teachers. I just gave our teachers all a 2% pay raise. It's the first time their pay has gone up since 2007. Rewarding teachers, investing in education.
You know, in this workforce issue, Governor McCurry, what Governor Hickenlooper described as the Colorado paradox, a lot of big cities doing a great job at attracting college graduates from around the country, but having more trouble equipping the kids who grow up in that city to compete for those same jobs, whether it's a Charlotte or a Denver. In fact, all of the cities that have gained the most jobs since 2000, the share of college graduates born from outside the state in that city is higher than the share born within the state. It's Houston, Dallas, Denver, many others. So when you look at it from a point of view of North Carolina, as your youth population is changing in this demographic revolution, are you equipped to close these gaps and create that workforce on the track that you're on today?
We're equipped, but we have to change our message to the students. First of all, we all agree preschool, and if a kid's not reading by third grade, we've lost him. There's no doubt about it. We've lost them. The chances of them being a dropout, faking it between then and 15 and 16, then they'll drop out, we've lost them. So by third grade, if they're not reading and if we allow just passing them through, we've lost the war. The second thing, in middle school, we have to get to the middle school guidance counselors and let them know of potential career paths, even at that age, and let them know about disciplines like manufacturing and technology. Because we've sent a false message in our country for the last 20 years. The baby boom generation, which I'm a part of, is saying the only way you become a success, this is not politically correct, we've been saying the only way you become a success is to get a four-year college degree. And that is not a correct message. There are several career paths. One is to have other options, and that's a two-year degree, a certification, a skill. Because right now, in North Carolina, the average age of a mechanic is 57 to 58 years old. The average age of a farmer, which the ag industry is doing pretty good now, the average age of a farmer is 58 years old. We better convince the next 20-year-olds that there are opportunities in technology, in fixing things, and making things, and building things, and innovating things that are in our small towns.
Governor,
that's a messaging dynamic that all of us have to participate in. And so we're having, just like Terry, as manufacturers, go to our schools and bringing the schools to the plants and giving tours and showing them that opportunity.
Governor Ricketts, Governor McAuliffe, and Governor McCrory both emphasize preschool, starting early. The president wants to create a national program that would provide states the option to tap federal funds to expand their own preschool. Should there be a national effort to expand access to preschool, or should it be done state by state?
Well, I'm more biased to the states actually figuring out the solutions. That, you know, our founders actually really designed our system to be run more at the state and local level, and we've got way too much bureaucracy in Washington, D.C. right now as it is. And the fact of the matter is, there's not going to be a silver bullet answer that solves a lot of these things. The solutions we come up with in Nebraska may be very different from North Carolina or Virginia or Colorado. So, you know, in fact, just talking about this early childhood education, I just met with our Commissioner of Education and superintendents from all across our state, because we're talking about this right now in Nebraska. And one of the things I challenge them with is, hey, we have to come up with something that actually works. Getting to your point, can the kid read by third grade?
Yeah.
We got to have something simple that we can measure and know what we're doing is working, because we're asking taxpayers then to be able to do this. Yeah. And we've got to show that it works, because, you look at some of the research, for instance, from Head Start, and you see some of the effects of the Head Start programs wear off by 3rd grade. Well, why? What are we doing wrong? And, I work with inner city Catholic schools, and I know that when you've got low-income kids, a lot of times they show up, they haven't been read to before they get to kindergarten. They may have nutritional needs. They may have, counseling needs. They do require more resources, but we got to make sure that what we're doing is actually going to be effective. We got to make it effective to make sure that we continue to have the support of the taxpayers.
I'm going to move on to infrastructure, energy, immigration, a few others, but real quick, Governor McAuliffe, do you think there should be a federal program to expand access to pre-K?
Listen, I like that the president put it out there. I think every state's unique, and I think states ought to be able to make the decisions in their own states. Everybody has different requirements and different ways of doing it. We ought to get together and get best practices, but I think we ought to figure out what we need to do in our education system.
Governor?
Well, I think
I'll take the funding.
Yeah. I was gonna say, would you take the funding?
I'm trying to find a back way to respect this notion that states are the laboratories of innovation for the country, because I do respect that. But something like this, and the preschool studies that showed that it wore off. The latest study that I saw now has gone, and when you look later in life, so in their 20s, those kids who got early childhood education, even though it kind of disappears for a while in high school, they're going to prison less, they're doing a better job of creating families when they want families instead of getting accidental families. I mean, there is success that investment you make as in the children really does make a difference. And that's the kind of thing, as those studies become, once there's a widespread study that really demonstrates this works, I think it's fair then that the federal government should say, all right, do we all agree that we're at that level now? And that's what makes political campaigns. But we're getting close to that on early childhood education.
One last question on education before we go on to other subjects. North Carolina was one of the first states to adopt the Common Core. But you've signed legislation that created a commission to review the Common Core.
Right.
Where is that? What is your thinking about whether Common Core makes sense?
I agree with the concept of Common Core, that we have to have basic standards of math and science and reading that are internationally competitive. The dilemma we're having is what Common Core did coming down from the national government, especially in some of the federal grants, was force all this testing in which we're teaching by test now, instead of letting our teachers to become independent and teach each individual student the best they can by the best each individual student can learn. And that's the real problem. So we're really doing a reviewing of all of our testing. During the last 5 years, our teachers are just they're teaching by test. And I don't think that's effective. Now, that doesn't mean we shouldn't have tests, but they shouldn't be repetitious. They should be more efficient. And the test should occur at a point in time when you can make corrections for the students, not when it's too late.
You have adopted Common Core in Colorado. What's been your experience?
Well, we changed it. So we made it Colorado Core. And I think it's important to note that the whole notion of Common Core came out of the National Governors Association. Right. Groups of governors, it was their idea. We want to have high standards for our kids. We want to be able to have accurate assessments. And absolutely, we need to get these tests back so that the teacher can use the information. I think the problem is there are too many tests. What's happening, a lot of school districts are saying, well, we want to do pre-tests, and we want to measure the testing along the way so that we find out whether, and there are too many tests. I hear this every single place I go. But I think we still need, and what the expectations are, that you're going to go from 3rd grade up to 11th grade and make sure that there's a test every year, so we can see that the investment, look at it from a fiscal responsibility. We're, as governors, we're spending however many $1,000s per kid, and we need to be able to say that money's being spent wisely. And you can't do that without some sort of accurate, objective measurement.
Governor Ricketts, let me change subjects and start with you. It's not exactly a newsflash that on most issues, Washington today is stalemated between the president and the Republicans in Congress. Is that standoff basically okay with you, or are there areas where you would prefer a clear resolution and direction from national policy? And if so, which ones?
Well, I think the thing that would be helpful from Washington is to have some stability and some certainty. So could we just get answers on things? How could Washington help us out? Well, start relieving us from some of the regulations that they're putting under right now. Trying to, for instance, build a road and comply with all the rules there. We ought to be able to have some common sense applied. Allow our engineers to actually be engineers, for example. Those are the kind of things I think Washington can actually be helpful on. If, Governor Hickenlooper and I were just talking about the roads bill. Again, certainty and stability in what's coming down the path. We all know that the federal government's going to put money into roads. Let's have a plan that actually looks long-term to be able to help us in the states to be able to plan.
Governor Perry, what would...
Probably three quick areas. One is health care. If the Supreme Court overturns the National Health Care Act, someone in D.C. needs to be coming up with a B plan, and no one's doing it. The president's not doing it, and Congress is not doing it. And in fact, the National Health Care Plan is an example to me where you can debate whether it's a good or bad plan. The dilemma is none of the debate had anything to do with the execution, and it's the states and the counties that had to execute the National Health Care Act. And we weren't involved in that discussion. The second issue is energy. Terry and I are working on energy and trying to do offshore development off of our Virginia, South Carolina, North Carolina. And if we're going to do it, we need some revenue sharing. And we need the president to agree with revenue sharing where it's not worth our political capital to get involved in that business. But we both feel it's very, very important for our states to be in the energy business in a bipartisan way. In transportation, I'll talk to Republicans. I'll be critical of my fellow Republicans. They need a long-term plan for transportation. And Governor of Colorado and I, who served as mayors together, know how important it is to plan for transportation. They're 20-year plans, 25-year plans. And this, putting out the fires every year, is putting us in terrible process of anticipating the growth. And it's hard to do the environmental studies and the engineering studies when we don't have a long-term plan that the federal government passed.
Governor McAuliffe, at this point, is stalemate in Washington basically okay with you, or are there areas that you need resolution on?
It's a disaster for Virginia. It's a disaster for every governor up here today. And it's a disaster, I say, for our country. We compete now on a global basis. We got to be competitive. But when we can't get action out of Washington, it impacts our ability to compete on a global basis. I was with the director of NIH yesterday. Francis was telling me that we now have the lowest funding we have had in the history of the NIH for grants for all of our medical discoveries. Right today, England is right now trying to do DNA sequencing on 10,000 different samples. Are we going to sit here and allow the United Kingdom to leapfrog our healthful delivery system here in the country? These are practical implications that are happening. The inaction to make a long-term decision is crippling for us. I've already mentioned sequestration. This was a piece of legislation that's so onerous that nobody would ever vote for it. Well, they passed it. Now, as you all know, on October 1st, Congress doesn't, it happens automatically. Most people don't know this. They now have to get together and vote to stop it. All I'm trying to get is a common sense. But the way it is done today, it will be a bludgeon meat axe to the defense budget, which will be crippling at a time when we have terrorist issues throughout the globe. We should be investing strategically in the defense, and we're going to do across-the-board cuts, which will have, I believe, very serious consequences. And the last thing, as everybody said, transportation. In Virginia alone, if we can't get this transportation funding problem solved, I stopped 352 road projects. I lose $1 billion. How can I plan 5, 10, 15 years? That's what you have to do on roads. And the Congress has got to understand.
I'm working with Terry to express himself more.
Yes. Well, but before you go to Governor Hickenlooper, you mentioned defense as a problem on sequestration. The president is saying no relief from sequestration on defense unless there's also relief on domestic. Would that be your position as well?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Everybody has to take a haircut on, but do it smartly, do it strategically.
What do you think out of Washington, if anything?
Well, obviously, everything these guys, I mean, we're all on the same page. And the infrastructure, whether you're talking about research, medical research, but all the kind of research. We were part of that same discussion of, the National Institute of Health used to be a researcher would get their first big grant when they were 32 or 33 years old. Now they're getting their first big grant when they're 50. Used to be that one out of every 2 or 3 of the top research groups, they would get a grant every year, 1 out of 2 or 3. Now it's like 1 out of 6. So they're stopping. At a certain point, they give up and they go back into the private sector where they can make 4 times as much money. That is a great peril to our future economy. And this transportation, each one of us mentioned transportation. And Pat McCrory and I, when we were mayors, we were both on the transportation committee for about 6 years. It takes years, even if we can get rid of some of the regulations, which I totally agree with Governor Ricketts, that the federal government's got to simplify how we apply for permits, and it should not take 4 years or 5 years to apply for any of these projects, a bridge or a road. But in the end, you need predictability. These projects take so much time to plan and to fund, you can't have each year a 12-month extension of your transportation bill. We need a 5-year funding bill this year, right? I mean, we are the wealthiest country on earth, and go out and look at our roads. All over, even in the most prosperous cities, our interstates are probably the worst disrepair in my lifetime.
One of the starkest divides among the states now is their posture toward the Affordable Care Act that you mentioned. I remember a few years ago we were talking at the National Governors Association, Governor Hickenlooper, and you said, look, you know, this isn't an ideological question. Some states are going to do it, some states aren't. We're going to be able to look back in a couple years and see how it's going and how it's progressing. You have chosen to accept the expansion of Medicaid in your state. What is your verdict on what it's meant for Colorado?
I think it's been a positive for Colorado, but not without a bunch of bumps. And it certainly, this is a learning experience, and states are implementing this in different ways. But long term, we are going to be able to bend the cost curve back down. We are adding so many people into the systems that we are able to scale some of the efficiencies. People forget that in 2008 and 2009, before we began these implementations, 80% of all the hospitals in the country use paper for their patient records, for their prescriptions. 90% of the doctors, now it's the inverse, right? So now we've got technology involved. We're going to get real information, real data that we'll be able to use to figure out, you know, what are the bottlenecks? How do we, I mean, these dual eligibles, we all know that's a problem. What's the solution, right? We've got enough data now. Let's go to fact-based decisions and begin to solve these problems. In Colorado, I think it's been a great part of our economy, right? That we've got more people who are able to go to work every, you know, they're not having to take as many sick days. They're not using the you know, for one reason or another, using the emergency room for their primary health care. That makes a difference in your efficiency. When you're looking at, you know, millions of workers, that makes a big difference.
Governor Curry, you indicated in your State of the State this year that you were open to expanding Medicaid if you could develop, quote, a North Carolina plan, not a Washington plan. What does that mean, and where do you stand?
I'm trying to negotiate with the administration for waivers that would allow us to have our own plan. For example, waivers, because, you know, you got to remember Medicaid was originally established to help women and children, the disabled, and so forth, and the elderly. And this expands that to a larger group. And what I wanted to do is make training requirements, work requirements to accept this new insurance, which would be North Carolina in the third year would have to still do 10% of the cost, and we don't know what that costs. 10% of what? We have no idea. And we don't know how much the bureaucracy will be 5-10 years from now to handle that. So I'm looking for waivers and options. As a mayor, I got waivers from previous administrations for public housing, which allowed certain requirements, and it worked.
Would you be optimistic or pessimistic today you're going to get the approval you need?
The administration is not going to give me those waivers for work or training requirements at this point in time. The president and I had a very interesting disagreement in the Oval Office. He just disagrees with waivers as it relates to health care. And I understand his argument. I disagree with his argument. But we will not know the real impact of the National Health Care Act for years, because the impact, it's still being implemented. And with the Supreme Court case, I will be one of the largest states impacted by that, with about 500,000 people. And again, there is no B plan at this point in time. And I'm trying to develop a North Carolina B plan, and it's very complex.
When you talk about the B, what you're talking about is whether the Supreme Court rules this summer that states that rely on the federal exchange cannot provide, the subsidies will no longer be available. Those are not the Medicaid expansion. These are people buying on the private market. If the Supreme Court does rule against the administration and invalidate those subsidies, do you believe Congress should restore them for my number is the 926,000 people in
this is where I think Congress and the White House need to be meeting right now and talking, and neither party is talking. The president told me, frankly, very forcefully in a most recent governor's meeting at the White House, saying, well, first of all, the Supreme Court won't reject it. Second, the plan is working. And third, if you don't like it, just do a state exchange. A state exchange would take me at least 2 years to develop under our current plan. 100 counties, it's for the 9th most populous state. You can't just turn off a light switch and go on again. But I want to participate. I think all the governors would be interested who currently are on the federal exchange, interested in working with the White House and Congress. I think they're playing a game of chicken.
If they talk to each other, would your goal be to sustain funding? Is that what should the people who are now?
I think they need to. I think they need to do some major amendments and refinement of that national health care plan that a lot of people didn't read when they passed it. But I do think there's a middle ground. And again, there have been so many exemptions to the national health care plan due to politics. A lot of businesses are exempted. I've got a lot of businesses right now that won't grow above 50 employees, so they aren't susceptible to that plan. Those are the things we as a nation have to work through.
I want to go to energy in a minute, but Governor Ricketts, real quick, both on the expansion of Medicaid and the possibility of losing subsidies for those who are now getting them in the state. What would you like? What is your thinking on both fronts?
Well, we haven't expanded Medicaid in Nebraska. We're going to be pursuing more Nebraska-based solutions. For instance, our federally qualified community health care clinics are a great way to provide health care to people who don't have it. And I was actually having my monthly radio call-in show, and a woman called up and said, please expand Medicaid. And she described her situation where her husband had lost the job in the factory. Now he's, working on lawnmowers from home, And what she really wanted was for her husband to get that job that's got the benefits so she could get the health care again. And that's really what we want to focus on is how can we help people take those jobs, again, through workforce development and so forth, that have those benefits. And for the other folks, are there solutions that aren't going to sign us up to this unknowable long-term liability which could bankrupt our states? And the 90% match, I got to tell you, folks, that's not going to last. The federal government can't afford that. In our state, they promised to pay for 40% of the expansion of special education. Now they're down to paying like 20%. So the federal government can change the rules at any time on you. So relying on them is not something that makes me feel all warm and fuzzy. And with regard to some of what happens in this King versus Burwell, our U.S. Senator Ben Sass has proposed a solution that would look like COBRA, that would give us 18 months to kind of sort all this out to see what would we be able to do as states if this did get thrown out. And that's where I would agree with Governor McCrory here, that we have to have Washington show some leadership here. And for the president to say there's no plan B is not leadership. That's a lack of leadership.
You have sought very hard to expand Medicaid in your state. Why do you think it's a good idea?
And I'm optimistic that next year we can get it done. The point I've continually tried to make, listen, it's $1.8 billion a year to Virginia that will run through our economy. Most of the members of my General Assembly get it. It's 400,000 Virginians that will get access to quality care. 80% of them are actually working. Many of these are SEIU workers doing 2 or 3 home health care jobs. When I made the argument to the Commonwealth, almost every major business person supported me. The Virginia Chamber of Commerce, every Chamber of Commerce endorsed it. Most of these are very Republican groups because they understand the dynamics. I like to say, you can dislike the president, you can dislike health care. We are paying the taxes in. We have the right to bring 100% back. And I've been working with Secretary Burwell and her team. I think I've got us to a place where the state will have no obligation. We can do it when we come off the 100%, that the private providers will pay the difference because it's worth it to them to bring $1.8 billion back to run through our economy. Some of the most conservative governors in America, Michael Pence has done this, Governor Kasich of Ohio. I got to sit with Governor Beshear of Kentucky and listen to Steve talk about how he's created over 40,000 jobs by closing the coverage gap. I need those jobs in Virginia. I need a healthy workforce to compete on a global basis. I've paid the money in. Let's bring it back. The bottom line in Virginia, unfortunately, it was about politics. Unfortunately, we lost Eric Cantor. He was our House Majority Leader. He was Republican. I'm a Democrat. I was very dismayed. No governor wants to lose the House Majority Leader to be Speaker. But what happened is the advent of the Tea Party really got moving. And many Republican legislators have said to me privately, I'd vote for this because I understand in the rural communities it's devastating. But if I do, I will get a Tea Party challenge. And it's happened. 2 Republican senators who worked with me are leaving. The others being challenged. So once we get through the election season this year, I'm hoping that people will have an open mind.
I don't know if people in this room have heard, but there may be a energy pipeline through Nebraska that people have talked about.
It'd be nice for the State Department to approve that. We'd certainly love to have that.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, talk about what is your understanding of where things stand and what would it mean for the state if you could get that?
Well, for Nebraska, it would create about 3,000 jobs while it's being built and about 300 jobs thereafter. And it would be huge for the counties it runs through because it would help with the local property tax base, which is a challenge, I'm sure, in all of our states to be able to pay for our schools. Nebraska, of course, does that primarily through property taxes. So that would be a big deal for us. It's also, of course, talks to energy security here in this country. It also talks to how do we transport this oil. Right now, this oil is moving. It's moving by rail, and it's moving by rail through Nebraska. So for us, it makes a ton of sense. We actually had a political process in Nebraska that I think worked. People had objected to the original route of the pipeline. We moved it that substantially addressed those concerns. Now we're ready to get it built.
Terry and I are actually working on a pipeline from West Virginia through eastern North Carolina, which will have a huge impact on our accessibility to lower cost electricity, which is the cost of electricity is a major driving force in recruiting industry. So Terry and I are working together on that. We're going to be facing NIMBY issues as it goes through, but we think we'll get it done. An internal pipeline.
Speaking of cost of electricity, one of the most important things going on in Washington that will affect the energy dynamic in all of your states are the EPA regulations on carbon emissions from existing power plants. Nebraska, you are one of the states suing to block the order. I'm going to come back to
Right, because they're not following the law. They need to do that.
Well, that's a good part.
All right.
Let's come back to that in 1 second. I want to ask you both, starting with Governor Hickenlooper, what would that regulation, the regulation envisions a very large role for the states in devising a plan to meet these carbon reduction targets. The majority leader of the Senate, Mitch McConnell, has asked states not to develop a plan, not to submit plans. Do you plan to submit a carbon reduction plan for Colorado under the EPA regulations, and what will those regulations mean for your state?
Well, we are certainly putting together a plan. I think you should have plans ready for every eventuality you can imagine. In Colorado, we've done a bunch of wind and a bunch of solar. We're pretty far down the road. We passed the Clean Air, Clean Jobs bill before I became governor, but it basically is converting a couple of the coal plants into natural gas. Natural gas, we have a lot of it in Colorado, and it's very expensive and very clean. So I think we're going to get there anyway, but I think your question really is, what's the philosophical perspective on this? And, ultimately, we're moving, we're going to all move towards a cleaner energy economy without question. And each year that goes by, our tolerance for air pollution, for the consequence of air pollution, I don't care where you are on climate change. Personally, I look out there, I'm not going to get into a battle over what the cause is or who's to blame, but the climate is definitely changing. I think almost everyone agrees to that, and it's got some pretty serious consequences. So as a society, you don't have to call it climate change. You don't have to get into that hole, down in the mud and into that battle. But we're all moving towards a less carbon-based economy. We want to do it, our energy economy. We want to do it in such a way that we don't hurt our economic economy, right? We don't want to have suddenly, all of us are competing to have that inexpensive electricity. It's a huge part of the technology jobs that we're trying to attract. But we're going to get cleaner, and we should get cleaner.
You will submit a plan then? Your plan is to submit a plan under the... How about you, Governor McCrory? What do you think?
We're fighting this effort at this point in time. We've got a state plan. We're proud of our state plan. We've got sustainable energy. We've shut down some coal plants. We've built more efficient coal plants. We've got nuclear power. We're looking at natural gas, of course, is exploding, having a huge impact. But for the federal government to come down and not talk about what the impact will be on the economy and the average person in manufacturing plants' electricity cost during the next 10 years is being extremely disingenuous. And no one's talking about the true cost to the economy and to the individual consumer. And everyone says our electric prices throughout the nation are going to continue to go up. I sat during the Energy Summit before this, and everyone's got to be honest on how much these new regulations are going to cost. And they're treating every state almost the same, when every state has different needs and geographical limitations on where and how they get their energy.
Governor Ricketts, why are you suing?
Well, the EPA needs to stay within the law. And that's one of the things we've seen, and certainly under this administration, is that they are vastly overstepping their ability and their authority that's been written by Congress. You see, Congress is the one who actually gets to make these laws. The EPA doesn't. So they need to stay within those guidelines. We saw it most recently on this Waters of the U.S., where the EPA, even though it says navigable waters in the Clean Water Act 81 times, the EPA is now claiming they can regulate roadside ditches and ponds. And hey, I get it, I'm a landlocked state, but I don't think you can take a boat from a ditch to any other navigable water. So we've got some problems with what the EPA is trying to do here. And, to Governor Hickenlooper, here in Nebraska, we are the only public power state. We have some of the lowest utility rates in the country, and we are going to be the site of the first utility-scale hydrogen burning plant. When you burn hydrogen, all you get off is water vapor. So we are going to do the right things in our state, but the EPA has to stay within their bounds of what they've got the ability to regulate. And if they got a problem with that, they should go to Congress and get the laws changed.
Would this be good for the state of Virginia, the EPA regulation?
Well, first of all, we support reducing carbon emissions. We have worked very aggressively. I just did a whole new, through executive order, Solar Development Authority. I just got Dominion, our power company, put $700 million up. Just 2 weeks ago, I stood down in Virginia Beach and announced we're the first state to have a federal lease program for turbines, 2 6-megawatt turbines about 27 miles off the coast. I have been, and I don't want to get into my private conversations with cabinet secretaries, but myself and my team have been in constant communication. I support the plan. And these are coming down July. I was told this by Gina the other day. No illusions. People think it's going to get pushed off a year. They are coming down this July. The issue I've had, and I've been public on this, I've done it diplomatically, Virginia has 41 to 45% nuclear. There is no carbon emission with nuclear power. I'm a huge supporter of it. Another plant's possibly coming online. I want to make sure that these standards, that we get credit. Right now, in the existing regs, you get no credit for nuclear. So here we've invested billions and billions of dollars in an energy source that has not emitted any carbon into the air. Why would we be treated differently than my neighbors in West Virginia and Kentucky? This is a discussion I've had with Gina, my folks have had. I'm hoping that my pleas will be responded to. I'm very vocal on this topic.
You mentioned, I'm going to bring in the audience.
I love watching it be diplomatic.
It is great.
I love this.
I'm going to bring in the audience in here. But Governor McAuliffe, you mentioned Mike Pence before, and Governor Pence kind of wandered into an unexpected economic development issue with the Religious Freedom Restoration Act in Indiana, which generated enormous controversy, enormous interventions by the business community. You have a Religious Freedom Restoration Act under consideration in North Carolina.
It's dead.
It's dead? Gone? You said no.
I said before
you
Pence.
You said no.
I said before Pence, Governor Pence, who's a good friend of all of ours, before the Indiana issue, we had a bill in place in both my House and Senate. And I asked the question, what is the problem they're trying to solve? And I've yet to get that answered. I want to meet this florist, wherever this florist is, because it's not in my state. But I respect the issue and concern. But most people don't realize a former senator from North Carolina by the name of Jesse Helms voted against it in the Senate. 3 senators voted against this when Bill Clinton signed the bill.
That's good cover.
One of the senators, thank you very much.
That helps in North Carolina.
I threw that on you when Bill Clinton signed it.
Yes.
You know, Jesse Helms was the only Republican to vote against it, and I think he was wise then. And so I don't know what the problem is we're trying to solve.
There's a bill introduced in Virginia. Is it breathing?
Listen, we have totally changed. From when I became governor 14 months ago, we'd had, as you know, because you're there out in the area, very onerous anti-women legislation and all this other social issues. When I ran for governor, very unique campaign in Virginia. I was the first candidate statewide to come out for marriage equality. I told women I'd be a brick wall to protect their rights. All I said and encapsulated, I want to get Virginia where 90% of Fortune 500 companies are. You want to bring businesses? They are not going to come to a state that discriminates. It's hard enough to bring business to your state. So those issues, I'm proud to say, of the Commonwealth, they're done. Growing, diversifying the economy. Talking about the future, bringing jobs in.
All right, let's bring in the audience in at that point. Do we have any questions? I think we have a couple microphones. We have a question right here. Yes. Please identify yourself real quick.
Hi, John Donahue from Gerson Lambert Group. Governor McAuliffe, good to see you again.
John, good to see you.
So we are a relatively small company, $300 million in revenue, growing to 450 to 500 million over the next several years. And we are the face of this small company economy in the United States, which will drive job creation over that time period. The average age of an employee we hire is 23 to 24 years old. We are headquartered in New York City, but our fastest growing office is in Austin, Texas. Austin has been an attractive place for us to grow employees and to grow our business by virtue of the low cost of living, by virtue of the state university system that generates a lot of really smart young professionals who are not carrying overwhelming student debt, and by virtue of the quality of life. However, in the last 3 years, we've begun to see some challenges in Austin with respect to infrastructure, with respect to students coming in or young people coming into the state with student debt, and with respect to an overcrowded living environment, driving up the cost of living. So my question for you guys is, when you think about attracting 22 to 24-year-olds, how do you think about infrastructure? How do you think about student debt, which is really, really creating a big problem for small companies like us who are looking to hire young professionals at attractive rates?
Denver has focused a lot on attracting millennials. Talk about what works.
So the infrastructure and that notion, a lot of the young millennials don't want to have to own 2 cars. If there's a couple, they want to have 1 car, no cars. When I was mayor, and Pat and I talked about this, we passed what's called Fast Tracks, 119 miles of new light rail track over the whole metro area. We took the time, we got all 34 mayors, so 2/3 were Republicans, but from big cities like Denver and Aurora, small little towns like Foxfire, we got 34 out of 34 mayors to support a 0.4% sales tax to build that infrastructure. And now we hear the millennials talking about it all the time. In terms of debt, it's a huge issue, right? And again, while I was mayor, there's a guy named Tim Marcus and his wife Bernie, Veneco Oil. They gave a $50 million foundation grant so that we could have the Denver Scholarship Foundation and make sure the kids in Denver, if they work hard enough, money won't keep them from going to college and they won't graduate from college with a bunch of debt. So in terms of that specific issue, I think this country needs to be working more towards, achievement-based scholarships so kids don't come out. My executive assistant, she's got a master's in journalism. I don't know what, I hope she's not listening. I don't know what she was thinking, but she's got $45,000 of debt still now. She's 35 years old. This is not a good thing for the country. It's not a good thing for home building industry. But if you want to attract the young people, I really do think that infrastructure, having mobility and affordable housing, decent public schools, not just decent, but better than average public schools, that's what they're paying attention to.
You want anything, Governor, as a former mayor?
Well, as former mayor, we worked together. Actually, I used Denver as a role model when I was mayor of Charlotte. I'm a Republican mayor who invested in light rail and had a referendum for a half-cent sales tax increase, and it's working. They were calling it the McCrory line when it was overcost and late. It's now called the Blue Line. It's working. It's the way it works in politics.
We got any other questions in the audience? Because I have one final one I want to squeeze in. If we have a question anywhere, please. Back in the back. Okay.
Hello. Hi, I'm Robert Shapiro. I'm the chairman of the Brent Shapiro Foundation for Alcohol and Drug Awareness and Prevention. And we talked about this with Governor McCoy. I'd like to know what the economic and social ramifications are of legalized marijuana in Colorado and how the other governors feel about this in their states.
Okay, so real quickly, so you can get into your last question. What I tell all these governors, and I've said it to everybody for the last couple of years, is don't jump into action. Let's see how this comes. And obviously addiction is a very big concern. We're paying a lot of attention. So far we haven't seen problems, but we're worried that if it really is a gateway drug, that we're going to see more kids addicted. And we are being very careful to keep, we'll have about $70-some million this year in tax revenues from legalized marijuana. It'll probably be over $100 million this coming year. We want to make sure we hold that money for unintended consequences. We're not just going to spend it on early childhood education or other good, positive social investments. We want to make sure we have the resources. And we worry about the candies. They put pot and THC now on all the candies. High intensity THC, when a brain is still growing in teenage years, has every neuroscientist, everyone I've talked to says, has a high probability of permanently reducing long-term memory. It's your IQ. It's a lot to risk. So I'm just saying, let's wait a couple of years for everybody. That if states are the laboratory, and I didn't choose this, I opposed the darn thing. Yeah. But we're going to do it, and if it can work, I think we'll figure out a way to make it work, and we might. But I would urge people to go slowly.
Well, I respectfully disagree with the waiting part, because we in Nebraska, being a border state, are seeing a direct impact in our state. Talking to local sheriff's departments, they're seeing a huge number of people coming across the border where marijuana is still illegal in Nebraska. And, for instance, in Sidney, Nebraska, which is right by the border with Colorado, last year we saw 4 murders in a town of 7,500, one over $150 worth of marijuana. We don't see 4 murders in Sidney, Nebraska. So we're feeling a big impact in Nebraska with people bringing marijuana into our state, transiting across our state. And we're seeing it in increased crime in the border areas, and it's going to make its way all the way across the state. So it's a bad deal to legalize marijuana anywhere, and it's certainly something that we're very concerned about.
I can tell you it will never happen in the Commonwealth of Virginia. It will not get through the General Assembly, but we are for medicinal uses. We were the first state, I just signed the bill, THC oil to be used for families with children with epilepsy because it does reduce the number of seizures. So there is strategic purposes that you can use it for. I would also say this, every governor's probably faced it. Pat and I are really facing it now, the epidemic of heroin abuse today. It is affecting, both of us have rural communities and the old coal areas of the Commonwealth. This, because it is so cheap, they are dumping it in the market. This is a crisis happening in states today, heroin abuse that's going on, and this is something we're all having to deal with.
The addiction issue in this country, the mental health and addiction issue is, I think, the biggest issue on our plate that we have no answers for, and it's costing 25% of my budget, 28% of my $21 billion budget is healthcare and mental health. And I'll tell you, this addiction issue and the way it's glorified in the media and the news and making it look like it's just, I don't believe in the term recreational. I think it's a false term because you're doing something that interferes, and I'm not doing this from a purist standpoint, and I respect what the governor's doing as far as educating and waiting, and I respect what the impact is on the border, but the impact on people's brain on all these drugs, and it's just not marijuana, the heroin problem in our universities, our colleges, our junior highs, people have no idea what's happening, and this is in all income levels in rural and urban parts of this nation, and people better start talking about it because the addiction issue of prescription drugs is huge right now. Legal and illegal drugs, it is something that's going to, talk about a work skill decline, that could be the biggest reason for the work skill decline in America is the addiction issue in America.
We're over time, but let me ask real quick, maybe Governor Hickenlooper and Governor Ricketts. You know, we've talked about areas of convergence here, a lot of similar concerns about skill sets, about infrastructure, at some extent about energy, but a lot of difference also on Medicaid, on climate regulation, on a variety of issues, particularly with the role of the federal government. Red and blue state, and we didn't even get to issues like gay marriage, gun control versus gun rights, a lot of issues in which states are diverging at this point, I think more than when I started covering politics in the 80s, and there were people like Lamar Alexander and Jim Hunt and Bill Clinton who were emphasizing the convergence between states. Is this a good thing for the country? Is this the laboratories of democracy? Or do you wonder when you look at something like the healthcare, the reaction to the healthcare law, that we are pulling apart too much and creating too much of a different reality for people who live in different states?
Well, I think on the governor's level, I mean, there are certainly, obviously, just as we saw, a real division of belief on certain core values and stuff. But generally, governors work together pretty well. I mean, even when we disagree, I'll sit down with Pete Ricketts in the next 5 minutes and say, 4 murders, I never heard that, and how can we help? And, you know, Governor Herbert of Utah is the vice chair of the National Governors Association. He and I, we had dinner together last Thursday. We agree on 90% of the stuff. And the stuff we disagree on, we spend a lot of time listening to each other and trying to persuade each other and really listening harder and saying, well, if that's you're going to do that kind of a waiver with health care, actually, I kind of like that. We'd support that. And I think that's what governors, we need to get more governors, you know, the governor process in Congress.
Yeah, Governor Ricketts? Good thing or bad thing that states are diverging on a whole variety of issues?
Well, I think it's a good thing. I think it's that competition of ideas that actually drives everybody to be better. And I think what Governor Hickenlooper said about, you know, governors cooperating is part of that. That we, you know, we're big believers in taking other people's good ideas and working together to try and figure out how it's going to impact our states and then customize it for our states. So I think it's a good thing. The other thing, I'm just going to make a plug-in. We need more people with business background to get involved in running government. Because one of my experiences in the few short months I've been governor is that we've got lots of opportunities to be able to just do a better job of running our governments. And it's not that people don't want government. They want government that works. And that's where I think if you've got that background in business where you've managed a large organization, you can help bring some of those private sector skills to making government more effective.
Well, this has been a great panel. Will you join me in thanking our 4 governors? And we send you on to your day. Terry, thank you. Thank you.
Good job.